My name is Elijah Jenkins, though most folks around these parts just call me Eli. 68 years old, and if you ask me, still got enough sawdust in my veins to build a cathedral. I live in a quiet, fading town, nestled in the heart of upstate New York, a place where the leaves turn fiery red in autumn and the winters bite deep. My home is a modest two-story house, nothing fancy, but every plank, every joint, every creak in the floorboards tells a story. And right next to it, the heart of my existence, stands Jenkins Woodworks, a workshop that's been in the family for 3 generations. For most of my life, the air in that shop smelled of fresh-cut pine linseed oil and honest effort. It was a symphony of saws, hammers, and chisels, each note played with purpose. My hands, gnarled and scarred from decades of shaping wood, were my instruments. They knew the grain of every timber, the whisper of every tool. They built tables that held generations of family meals, cradles that rocked newborns to sleep, and caskets that carried loved ones to their final rest. Craftsmanship, I always believed, was more than just skill. It was a promise of integrity, of lasting value, of a piece of yourself poured into something real. My wife, Sarah, used to say my workshop was my first love, but she was always my anchor. We met right here in this town, 2 young souls carving out a life. She understood the language of wood as well as I did the language of her heart. We had one son, Caleb. Sarah adored him, saw all her hopes and dreams reflected in his bright, inquisitive eyes. And I saw a piece of myself, a potential heir to the sawdust throne. I spent countless hours teaching him, letting him sand small pieces of scrap wood, showing him how a simple dovetail joint could hold the world together. He had a natural knack, a keen eye. I truly believed Jenkins Woodworks would live on through him. But life, as it often does, had other plans. Sarah passed away 5 years ago, taken by a sudden illness that left a gaping hole in my universe. It was as if the very air had been sucked out of my lungs, leaving me hollow. The workshop, once a source of joy, became a place of echoes. Caleb, he reacted differently. He seemed to pull away, to distance himself from the grief from me. He'd always been a driven young man, ambitious, but after Sarah's death, that ambition hardened into something I barely recognized. He moved to the city, got a job in finance, a world of numbers and screens that felt a million miles away from the tangible honesty of wood. He'd visit, but those visits felt more like obligations than genuine connections. The chasm between us, once a small crack, widened into a canyon. Now at 68, I find myself battling not just the physical aches and pains of age, but a more insidious foe, my own mind. There are days when the names of my tools escape me, days when I walk into a room and forget why I'm there. Dr. Reed, my kind and patient family doctor, had spoken to me about early signs about cognitive decline. He said I was handling it well, but the truth was it terrified me. It was like a slow, silent erosion, chipping away at the very core of who I was. A man who remembered every cut, every measurement, every detail. Caleb, of course, noticed. He didn't offer comfort or understanding. He saw an opportunity. The current state of our family, if you could even call it that, was one of polite indifference, laced with a barely concealed tension. Caleb rarely called, and when he did, it was usually to ask about the numbers of the business or to suggest ways to streamline operations, which in his language meant cutting corners, cheapening the craft. He hadn't set foot in the workshop to actually work on anything in years. The scent of pine, which once connected us, now seemed to repel him, replaced by the sterile aroma of his expensive cologne. We existed in separate orbits, bound only by the faint pull of a shared surname and a history that felt increasingly distant. This year, Thanksgiving was upon us. It was always Sarah's favorite holiday, a day meant for gathering, for warmth, for gratitude. Now it just felt like another hurdle to overcome. Caleb had called a few weeks prior not to invite me to his city apartment. He never did, but to announce his arrival. He would be coming to my house for dinner. He told me, not asked, that he'd bring his new associate, a woman named Jessica, from his firm. He also mentioned, almost as an afterthought, that he wanted to discuss the future of Jenkins Woodworks after dinner. The words hung in the air, heavy with unspoken implications, like a storm gathering on the horizon. I'd simply grunted in response, the familiar ache in my chest tightening a bit. I spent the days leading up to Thanksgiving in a flurry of activity, trying to ward off the loneliness and perhaps the encroaching fog in my mind. I polished the old dining table Sarah and I had built together, the one with the subtle inlay she'd designed. I baked a pumpkin pie from her recipe, the aroma filling the house with a bittersweet comfort. I even laid out the good china pieces that only saw the light of day on special occasions. It was a futile effort, I knew, to recreate the warmth that had died with Sarah, but I clung to the rituals. On Thanksgiving morning, the crisp autumn air smelled of wood smoke from a neighbor's chimney and the faint promise of snow. I was in the kitchen carefully basting the turkey when Caleb's sleek black sedan pulled into the driveway. It looked utterly out of place, a predatory shark among the gentle aging houses of our street. My heart gave a little lurch, a familiar mix of hope and dread. He emerged, first dressed in a designer suit that seemed too formal for a family dinner, even if it was Thanksgiving. He looked successful, polished, but there was a hardness around his eyes that Sarah would never have approved of. He didn't bother with a hug, just a quick, almost perfunctory nod. He clapped me on the shoulder, a gesture that felt more like assessing my frame than offering affection. He told me it was good to see me, but his eyes were already scanning the living room, taking in the familiar, well-worn furniture with a gaze that suggested appraisal rather than nostalgia. Then Jessica stepped out of the car. She was a tall, impeccably dressed woman with a tight professional smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. Caleb introduced her as his colleague, explaining that she was an expert in asset management and business restructuring. The words hit me like a cold spray. Asset management, business restructuring. On Thanksgiving, it felt less like a family dinner and more like a corporate takeover in disguise. Throughout dinner, the conversation felt stilted, forced. Caleb talked animatedly about his work, about market trends and investment opportunities, using jargon that flew over my head and I suspected was meant to. Jessica occasionally chimed in with equally sterile observations, her gaze constantly flitting around the room, as if calculating the square footage or assessing the antique value of Sarah's heirloom cabinet. They ate my turkey, complimented Sarah's pumpkin pie, though Jessica only took a tiny slice, but their presence felt like an invasion, a cold draft in a house that longed for warmth. I found myself drifting my mind occasionally, snagging on a forgotten word or a misplaced thought. I asked Caleb about a childhood friend, little Billy Peterson, who used to play in the workshop with him. Caleb just gave me a blank stare and said he hadn't thought about Billy in years. Jessica shot him a quick, almost imperceptible glance. It was a small moment, easily missed, but it burrowed into me, a confirmation of the emotional distance that had grown between us. After the meal, as I began clearing the plates, Caleb announced it was time for our discussion. He said it with a tone of finality, as if there was no room for debate. He led Jessica and me into the living room, where the fire I'd painstakingly built was now crackling merrily in the hearth. The warmth of the flames, however, did little to thaw the iciness that emanated from my son. He sat me down in my favorite armchair, the one Sarah had always insisted I keep even when it began to show its age. He took a seat opposite me, Jessica perched stiffly on the sofa. Caleb then launched into what he called a presentation. He didn't use visual aids, but his words painted a vivid, chilling picture. He explained that Jenkins Woodworks was underperforming, that its traditional model was unsustainable in the modern market. He spoke of my advancing age and recent health concerns, his voice devoid of genuine care, instead laced with a clinical assessment of my vulnerabilities. He even referenced a recent minor workshop accident where I'd cut my hand, an incident I'd quickly forgotten, but he clearly hadn't. Then came the proposal. He said he had a plan to revitalize the business. This plan involved selling the house and workshop to a developer, consolidating my finances into a managed fund, and moving me into an assisted living facility he had already researched extensively. He mentioned it had excellent amenities and a vibrant community for seniors. He said it was for my own good, for my safety and well-being. I just sat there listening, feeling the blood drain from my face. The fire in the hearth suddenly felt like a distant, irrelevant thing. My workshop, my home, the very fabric of my existence, all reduced to assets to be managed and restructured. Caleb spoke of the financial benefits, of the peace of mind I would have. He spoke of how easy it would be, how he would handle all the details. Jessica nodded along, her professional smile, unwavering, her eyes like cold glass. I finally found my voice, a rough croak. I told him the workshop was my legacy, Sarah's legacy. I said it was who I was. Caleb just sighed, a sound of weary exasperation. He told me I was being sentimental, that I needed to face reality. He said he wasn't trying to hurt me, but that he was doing what needed to be done. He reminded me again about my memory issues, about how I couldn't possibly manage everything anymore. His words, cloaked in concern, were a betrayal, a cold, calculated strike at my diminishing autonomy, using my own vulnerabilities against me. Jessica then chimed in, her voice smooth and practiced. She said that from a legal and financial perspective, Caleb's proposal was sound. She explained that given my reported cognitive decline, a court might even deem it in my best interest to have my affairs managed by a trusted family member. The implication was clear: if I didn't cooperate, they would force my hand. I felt a surge of indignation, a burning heat that momentarily cleared the fog from my mind. I looked at my son, the boy I had taught to sand wood, to respect the grain, to build with integrity. I saw a stranger, a man consumed by ambition, stripping away my dignity piece by piece. I wanted to scream, to lash out, but the words caught in my throat. My hands clenched, the old scars suddenly throbbing with a phantom pain. Caleb seemed to interpret my silence as reluctant acceptance. He smiled, a thin, triumphant curve of his lips. He told me he would be handling the paperwork in the coming weeks. He also said that he and Jessica would be staying for the night, as it was too late to drive back to the city. The audacity of it, planning to stay in the home he intended to strip from me. As the evening wore on, the tension in the house became almost unbearable. Caleb and Jessica retreated to the guest room, their voices a low murmur behind the closed door. I stayed in the living room, staring at the dying embers in the fireplace, the warmth doing nothing to dispel the chill that had settled deep in my bones. The pumpkin pie, still half-eaten on the counter, felt like a symbol of a Thanksgiving that had gone horribly, irrevocably wrong. I felt betrayed, not just by Caleb's actions, but by the insidious way he had used my own weaknesses against me. The workshop, my sanctuary, my life's work, was now under threat, not from strangers, but from my own flesh and blood. And the most agonizing part was the thought that perhaps, just perhaps, his words held a kernel of truth. Was I truly losing my grip? Was I becoming a burden? The questions gnawed at me, insidious and cruel, leaving me feeling more alone than I had ever felt, even after Sarah's passing. The sound of a floorboard creaking upstairs, a ghost of a sound, reminded me that the invasion had already begun. The fight, I realized with a heavy heart, was only just beginning, and it was against the one person I had always believed would carry my legacy forward. The embers in the fireplace had long since turned to ash, mirroring the desolation I felt inside. Thanksgiving, a day meant for gathering and gratitude, had instead become an unsettling prelude to a corporate raid on my life. Caleb and Jessica's hushed voices from the guest room, now silent in the deep hours of the night, only amplified my sense of unease. I remained in the armchair, the ghost of Sarah's presence, a cold comfort. My mind, usually a workshop of precise measurements and logical steps, was a chaotic jumble of dread and disbelief. Could my own son truly be planning to dismantle everything I held dear, all under the guise of my best interest? The words felt like sandpaper against my soul, rough and abrasive. The days following Thanksgiving blurred into a chilling routine. Caleb, true to his word, stayed in town, extending his visit into what felt more like an occupation. Jessica, his associate, had returned to the city, but her shadow loomed large over every conversation. Caleb was everywhere, always on his phone, always managing. He told me he was taking over the finances, sorting through the old-fashioned paper bills and transitioning everything to digital. He assured me it would be much simpler, much more efficient. He explained how he had set up online accounts, how he would handle all communication with the bank and utility companies. I found myself nodding, weary from the constant barrage of his technical jargon and the thinly veiled condescension in his tone. Part of me, the part that was increasingly tired and confused, almost wanted to believe him. It sounded like less to worry about, less to forget. But another part, a deeper, older instinct, screamed a silent warning. I started noticing small things, unsettling anomalies that pricked at the edges of my fading memory. My old leather-bound ledger, where I'd meticulously recorded every order, every payment, every penny earned and spent for decades, was gone from its usual spot in the workshop office. When I asked Caleb about it, he just told me he had digitized it and that the physical book was redundant and probably cluttering up the place. He said he'd put it somewhere safe, somewhere I wouldn't accidentally misplace it. But I felt a cold knot in my stomach. That ledger was more than just a record. It was a chronicle of my life, a testament to every piece of wood that had passed through my hands. Then there were the calls. My old friend Gus, who ran the lumberyard across the state, called one afternoon. I picked up the phone, eager for a friendly voice, but before I could even say hello, Caleb appeared, his face tight with annoyance. He quickly took the phone from my hand, told Gus that I was resting and unavailable, and that he would handle all future orders. He then informed me that Gus was getting too expensive, and that he had found better suppliers. My heart sank. Gus and I had been doing business for over 40 years, a handshake and a promise, always worth more than any contract. Now even that connection was severed. The workshop itself began to change. Caleb, when he wasn't on his phone, would spend hours in there not working wood, but moving things around, shuffling equipment, muttering about optimizing workflow. One afternoon I walked in to find him trying to sell my antique jointer. a machine Sarah's grandfather had used a piece of living history, to a dealer he'd found online. I remember telling him with a sharpness that surprised even myself that he couldn't touch that machine. He just gave me that exasperated sigh, saying I was being irrational and that it was just old metal taking up space. He put the sale on hold, but the incident left a bitter taste in my mouth, a stark reminder of his intent. My memory, the very thing Caleb used as his weapon, became my enemy. There were moments when I'd find myself staring at a half-finished project utterly blank, unsure of what I was doing or how to proceed. In those terrifying instants, Caleb's voice would echo in my head. "You can't possibly manage everything anymore, Dad." The doubt was a suffocating blanket, making me question my own sanity, my own grip on reality. I'd wander into the kitchen, forget why I was there, and then find Caleb looking at me with that pitying, almost condescending expression, confirming my worst fears. He'd suggest I lie down, take my medication, telling me he was just worried about me. And I would defeated retreat to my room, the guilt and confusion swirling within me. Maria, my kind friend at the coffee shop, noticed the change too. Whenever I managed to slip away for a few minutes and walk to her shop, her eyes would scan me, lingering on my worn clothes, the tired lines around my eyes. She'd ask me how I was, her voice soft with genuine concern. I'd try to reassure her, but the words felt hollow. She once mentioned that she hadn't seen Gus in a while and asked if he was well. I hesitated, then told her Caleb was handling all my suppliers now. Her eyebrows knit together in a subtle frown, and she gave me a glance that spoke volumes, a look of shared apprehension that briefly cut through my isolation. She asked if everything was all right with the X-ray machine in my workshop, the one that sometimes made strange noises. I knew she meant the old bandsaw, but her slightly mistaken terminology felt like a bizarre confirmation of my own mental slips, and I just mumbled that everything was fine. Then came the day the unexpected storm truly hit. It was a frigid Tuesday morning, the kind where your breath plumed in front of you like a cloud. I had planned to spend the day finishing the custom bookshelf for Mrs. Henderson, a longtime customer. It was a delicate piece, requiring precise cuts and careful joinery, the kind of work that demanded my full attention and the best of my tools. I walked into the workshop, my hands already anticipating the familiar weight of my chisel, set the smooth glide of my finest hand plane. But when I reached my workbench, a chill that had nothing to do with the cold air outside washed over me. My custom-made Japanese planes, each one a work of art honed to razor sharpness and passed down from Sarah's father, were gone. My antique brace and bit set, which I rarely used but treasured for its history and sentimental value, was also missing. In their place sat a generic, brightly colored power sander and a cheap, flimsy set of chisels I didn't recognize. It was as if a piece of my very soul had been ripped out. I stood there staring at the empty spaces, my heart pounding a frantic rhythm against my ribs. I felt a sudden dizzying wave of disorientation. Had I misplaced them? Was my memory playing tricks on me again? I frantically searched every drawer, every cabinet, calling out for Caleb, my voice raspy with a rising panic. He eventually came down, rubbing sleep from his eyes, his patience already thin. He asked me what was wrong, his tone flat. I told him my tools were gone, replaced by these cheap imitations. He just shrugged, telling me he had upgraded my equipment, that the old planes were inefficient and the brace and bit set was obsolete. He said he had sold them off online along with some other junk to finance the modernization of the workshop. He even mentioned a decent profit. The words hit me like physical blows. He had sold my legacy, Sarah's father's legacy, for a few dollars and a meaningless upgrade. I remember telling him, my voice trembling with a mixture of grief and fury, that those tools were irreplaceable, that they had history's soul. He just looked at me with that cold, assessing gaze of his, telling me I was being overly emotional and sentimental again. He said that sentimentality didn't pay the bills and that he was simply being practical. He then reminded me that I wasn't getting any younger and that I needed modern, easy-to-use equipment to prevent accidents. His words were a cruel inversion of care, using my age and vulnerability to justify his destructive actions. The feeling of betrayal was overwhelming, a tidal wave that threatened to drown me. I grabbed one of the cheap new chisels, felt its lifeless weight in my hand, and wanted to smash it. Instead, I just dropped it, the dull clang echoing in the suddenly cavernous workshop. My hands, the hands that had built so much, now felt empty, useless. How could he? How could my own son commit such an act of desecration? But the day wasn't over. Later that afternoon, a thick envelope arrived in the mail. It was from the bank, addressed to me. When I tried to open it, Caleb again snatched it away, telling me he was handling all correspondence now. He quickly scanned the contents, his face initially impassive, then a flicker of annoyance quickly masked. He told me it was just a routine notice about some paperwork. but something in his quick, dismissive gesture, the way his eyes darted away, made me suspicious. My gut clenched. That night after Caleb had gone to bed, supposedly working on his laptop, I couldn't sleep. The image of my missing tools haunted me, a gaping hole in my mind. I crept out of my room, my old knees creaking with every step. I knew Caleb had placed all the important papers in a locked cabinet in his temporary office downstairs, but I also knew his habits. He was often careless when he thought no one was watching. I found the envelope he had opened earlier, discarded in the wastebasket beside his desk. My hands trembled as I carefully retrieved it. It was indeed from the bank, but it was anything but routine. It was a final notice for a defaulted loan, a massive loan taken out against the workshop and the house. The documents clearly stated that if the payment wasn't made within 30 days, the bank would begin foreclosure proceedings. My heart seized in my chest. Foreclosure. My home. My workshop. Everything. And then I saw the signature. It was mine. Or rather, a clumsy, almost childish imitation of it. It looked hurried, shaky, nothing like the firm, confident strokes. I had always made the strokes that had signed countless contracts, countless deeds. My memory was failing, yes, but I knew my own hand. I knew my own promise. I had never not once signed for such a loan. A cold, hard clarity cut through the fog in my mind, sharper than any chisel. This wasn't about my well-being. This wasn't about modernizing the business. This was about stripping me bare, taking everything and leaving me with nothing. Caleb wasn't just neglecting me. He was systematically dismantling my life piece by piece, forging my name to do it. The memory lapses, the isolation, the upgraded tools. It all clicked into place, a horrifying mosaic of calculated betrayal. I stood there, the foreclosure. Notice a death warrant in my shaking hands. The forged signature, a grotesque mockery of my identity. The house was silent, save for the frantic beat of my own heart. I felt a surge of pure, unadulterated rage, a fire that threatened to consume me. But beneath the anger, a deeper, more agonizing pain took root. The crushing realization that my own son, the boy I had loved and nurtured, the son I had envisioned carrying on my legacy, had become my tormentor, my thief. The internal crisis was devastating. The Eli Jenkins who had always believed in the inherent goodness of family, the man who had poured his life into honest work, felt like he was shattering. How could I reconcile the ambitious, callous man upstairs with the bright-eyed boy who used to cling to my leg in the workshop? The love, the hope, the dreams I had for him, they twisted into a knot of bitter disillusionment. My mind, already fragile, felt like it was tearing apart, struggling to process this monstrous truth. Was I truly so foolish, so blind that I hadn't seen it? Or was it my failing memory that had allowed him to get away with it, making me doubt every instinct, every flash of clarity? I gripped the paper tighter, the edges biting into my skin. This wasn't a phantom pain. This was real. The danger was real. The loss was real. And the person inflicting it was my own son. The thought made me want to collapse, to surrender to the darkness that threatened to engulf me. But then a flicker, a tiny spark in the dying embers of my resolve. I had always been a builder, a craftsman, and even if my mind was failing, my hands, my spirit still knew how to fight for what was right. I might be old, I might be forgetful, but I would not let Caleb Jenkins erase me. Not without a fight. The silence of the house no longer felt empty. It felt like a battlefield, and I, Eli Jenkins, was finally ready to choose my weapon. It wouldn't be a hammer or a chisel. It would be the truth. The foreclosure notice lay crumpled beside me, a harsh testament to Caleb's betrayal. The forged signature, a grotesque parody of my own hand, burned itself into my memory. That night, sleep was an impossible luxury. Every creak of the old house, every whisper of the wind outside, seemed to mock my shattered peace. My mind, usually a safe harbor for the rhythm of woodworking, became a turbulent sea, churning with anger, grief, and a terrifying clarity that pierced through the usual fog. I was no longer just an old man losing his memory. I was a man under siege, and the enemy was my own son. The next morning I moved with a deliberate slowness, a quiet stealth honed from years of solitary work in the shop. Caleb was still asleep, oblivious, I hoped, to the seismic shift that had occurred within me. I needed to investigate, to gather proof, to arm myself with facts. My memory might be a fickle companion, but I knew how to piece together a puzzle, how to follow a trail of sawdust to its source. My first task was the bank. I retrieved the crumpled notice, smoothing out the creases with hands that still trembled slightly. The bank's name and phone number were clearly visible. I remembered Maria, my friend at the coffee shop. She was sharp, observant, and had a knack for seeing things others missed. But involving her, involving anyone, felt like admitting defeat, like exposing my family's shame to the world. And yet I couldn't do this alone. The weight of it, the sheer audacity of Caleb's actions, was too much to bear in isolation. Later that morning, I feigned an errand to the hardware store, making sure Caleb saw me leave. I walked the familiar route, each step feeling heavier than the last. The air was colder, crisper, as if mirroring the hardening resolve within me. When I reached Maria's coffee shop, the bell above the door chimed a familiar sound that usually brought a smile to my face. Today it felt like a discordant note in the symphony of my grief. Maria greeted me with her usual warm smile, offering me a fresh cup of coffee. I accepted, my hands wrapped around the comforting warmth of the mug. I noticed her studying me, her eyes filled with that quiet concern. I knew I looked rough, sleepless, defeated. I decided to start small to test the waters. I asked her if she had seen any strange mail for me, or perhaps for Jenkins Woodworks, that might have been delivered to her shop by mistake. I told her Caleb was handling all my mail now, and sometimes things got confusing. It was a half-truth, but it was all I could manage. Maria paused, her brow furrowed. She told me she hadn't, but then she remembered something. She said she had seen Caleb throwing out a box of papers in the public dumpster a few days after Thanksgiving. She said she was curious and had looked inside, finding some bank letters and old photos. My heart leaped. I asked her if she remembered anything specific about the bank letters. She said she remembered seeing the name of our local bank on some of them, and something about urgent action. She also said she saw some old letters addressed to me from my friend Gus, unopened. The pieces were beginning to fall into place. Caleb was actively intercepting my mail, preventing any warnings from reaching me. I thanked her, feeling a spark of grim determination. I told her I was just trying to get my affairs in order and that Caleb was helping me. I could see in her eyes that she didn't quite believe me, but she didn't press. She just told me to take care of myself and to let her know if I needed anything. Her quiet empathy was a balm to my wounded spirit. My next stop was the local bank. The same bank where Sarah and I had opened our first joint account, where I had taken out my first small business loan all those years ago. The building, once a symbol of stability, now felt like a fortress. I walked in, my heart pounding, and asked to speak to a loan officer. A young woman, polite but brisk, directed me to a small office. I sat across from Mr. Davies, a man I vaguely remembered from community events. He greeted me with a professional smile, asking how he could help. I told him I was concerned about my accounts, that my son was handling things, and I just wanted to get an update on any outstanding loans or recent activity. I tried to keep my voice steady, betraying none of the internal turmoil. Mr. Davies typed on his computer, his fingers flying across the keyboard. His smile slowly faded, replaced by a look of concern, then outright surprise. He asked me if I was aware of a significant loan taken out against Jenkins Woodworks in my home several months ago. He then asked if I was aware of the recent default notice. My face, I knew, must have been pale. I told him I wasn't. I told him I hadn't authorized any such loan. He looked at me, a flicker of suspicion in his eyes, but also a dawning understanding. He pulled out some documents, copies of the loan application and the promissory note. My name in that crude, shaky imitation stared back at me. He pointed to it and asked if it was my signature. I told him unequivocally that it was not. My voice, usually so steady, cracked with emotion. Mr. Davies's demeanor shifted immediately. He became serious, almost grave. He explained the legal implications of a forged signature, especially on a loan of this magnitude. He said he would need to open an internal investigation, but that I should consider contacting legal counsel and perhaps adult protective services. He also mentioned that the loan had been secured by a quitclaim deed, transferring a significant portion of my property rights to Caleb as collateral, a detail that had been carefully omitted from Caleb's presentation. The audacity, the calculated cruelty of it left me breathless. He had not only forged my name for a loan, but had also tried to steal my property outright. I thanked Mr. Davies, my mind reeling. He handed me copies of the loan documents, each page a fresh wound. I left the bank feeling both utterly violated and strangely empowered. The vague suspicion had solidified into concrete proof. This wasn't just a miscommunication or a misunderstanding. This was a deliberate act of fraud. The pain, a deep, agonizing ache, settled in my chest, worse than any physical ailment. It wasn't the pain of betrayal from a stranger. It was the gut-wrenching pain of a son, my only son, tearing down everything I had built, everything I had cherished. The emotional turmoil was immense. My memories, usually a jumbled mess, seemed to flash with agonizing clarity. Caleb as a child, his small hand in mine, learning to sand a piece of wood. The contrast was a brutal blow, making the present betrayal even more unbearable. I struggled with the image of that innocent boy, trying to reconcile it with the calculating man who had just stolen my life. I knew I couldn't confront Caleb yet, not without more evidence, not without a clearer head. I needed to move with extreme caution. My next target was my workshop office, Caleb's temporary headquarters. I remembered the hidden safe behind a loose brick in the old fireplace, a secret only Sarah and I knew. It was where I kept important documents, old property deeds, Sarah's will, and other valuables. I needed to check it to ensure Caleb hadn't discovered it. That evening, I waited until Caleb had again retired to his room. I could hear the faint sound of music, his taste in music as foreign to me as his business jargon. I slipped into the workshop, the familiar scent of sawdust no longer comforting but haunting. The moonlight filtering through the dusty windows cast long, eerie shadows. I moved to the fireplace, my fingers tracing the familiar outlines of the bricks. I found the loose one, pulled it out, and felt for the small lockbox. It was there, unopened. A small wave of relief washed over me. I retrieved the safe, brought it to my bedroom, and carefully opened it. Inside, all my old documents were there. Sarah's will, our marriage certificate, old photos, and most importantly, the original deed to the house and workshop, clearly stating my sole ownership. There was also a small sealed envelope labeled "For Caleb when the time is right," containing a personal letter from Sarah written just before she died, filled with her hopes for his future and a plea for him to cherish our family. The irony was a bitter pill to swallow. The true breakthrough came a few days later, unexpectedly. I still occasionally walked to the post office to check my old P.O. box, a habit Caleb hadn't yet managed to sever. I found a few junk mails, but then a small official-looking envelope from the county clerk's office. It was a property tax reassessment notice addressed to Jenkins Woodworks. I opened it, my heart in my throat. The notice listed not only my name as the owner, but also in smaller print, an interested party, Caleb Jenkins. And then a detail that made my blood run cold. The mailing address for the interested party was a P.O. box, not his city address, not my home address, but a completely unfamiliar P.O. box in a town a few hours away. Why would he have a P.O. box for Jenkins Woodworks so far away? And why would it be listed for him as an interested party when he had told me he was taking out a loan against the property for me, not for himself? It was another layer of deception, another carefully constructed lie. I took the notice back home, concealing it from Caleb. I found a quiet moment to call the county clerk's office. I explained my situation carefully, vaguely, saying I was an elderly property owner whose son was helping with my affairs, but that I was confused about a mailing address change. The clerk, a kind woman, was helpful. She confirmed that a change of mailing address for interested party Caleb Jenkins had been filed a few months prior, diverting all property tax notices to that specific P.O. box. She said she could send duplicate notices to my home address if I wished. I immediately requested it. She also mentioned that the change of address form had been accompanied by a quitclaim deed, transferring a partial interest in the property to Caleb. My heart hammered in my chest. So the bank was telling the truth. He had actually filed the deed. The evidence was mounting piece by agonizing piece. The missing ledger, the stolen tools, the intercepted mail, the forged loan, the hidden P.O. box, the concealed quitclaim deed. It was a horrifying tapestry of manipulation and deceit. My son, my own flesh and blood, was systematically dispossessing me, using my age and my fading memory as his instruments. The emotional toll was immense. I felt a profound sense of loss, not just of my physical possessions, but of the trust, the love, the very fabric of our family. The son I had once adored, the boy who had once looked at me with such admiration, had vanished, replaced by a calculating stranger. The internal conflict raged. How could I expose him? How could I drag my own son through a legal battle, knowing the scandal it would cause, the shame it would bring upon Sarah's memory? But then the image of Sarah's will in the safe, her hopes for our family flashed in my mind. She wouldn't want this. She wouldn't want Caleb to destroy my life, to desecrate our legacy. And she certainly wouldn't want me to surrender. The realization settled deep within me. This wasn't just about the money or the workshop or even the house. This was about my dignity, my autonomy, my very right to exist on my own terms. This was about honoring Sarah's memory, about protecting the legacy she had helped me build. I was an old man, perhaps a forgetful one, but I was not helpless. I still had my wits, what remained of them, and I had the truth. And with truth as my compass, I would navigate this storm, no matter how painful, no matter how devastating the fallout. The silence in my home, once a suffocating blanket of loneliness, now felt like a sharpening stone. I was preparing for battle, and my weapons would be facts, persistence, and an unwavering resolve to reclaim my life. Caleb may have thought he had me cornered, but he had underestimated an old craftsman who knew the value of a solid foundation and the danger of a faulty design. He had chosen to play a dangerous game, and I, Eli Jenkins, was finally ready to play back. The agony of his betrayal would fuel my fight. It had to. The crisp, cold air of the upstate New York winter seemed to bite deeper into my bones than usual, but the chill that truly gnawed at me was the one Caleb had inflicted. The foreclosure notice, the forged signature, the web of deceit he'd spun around me. They were no longer vague anxieties. They were concrete, damning facts. My investigation, quiet and clandestine, had yielded a truth far more painful than I could have ever imagined. My son, my only flesh and blood, was actively trying to erase me, to steal my home, my legacy, my very identity. The initial shock had given way to a simmering rage, cold and steady, like the embers in my workshop stove that could still ignite a roaring fire. I knew I couldn't let this stand. But confronting Caleb head-on in my current state, with my unreliable memory, felt like walking into a lion's den, unarmed. He was cunning, manipulative, and he wielded my vulnerabilities against me with cruel precision. I needed a plan. A solid, meticulously crafted plan, just like the heirloom furniture I used to build. My first thought, a desperate, almost pathetic plea, was to Sarah. I found myself sitting in the dim quiet of the workshop amidst the ghosts of sawdust and forgotten projects, speaking to her faded photograph. I told her everything, pouring out the agony, the shame, the profound sense of betrayal. I asked her what she would do, how she would reconcile the Caleb we both knew with the predator he had become. Her gentle smile in the picture offered no answers, only a poignant reminder of the love that once held our family together. But her memory, her unwavering belief in honesty and integrity, became my silent counsel. The path ahead was clear, albeit agonizing. I needed help, real professional help. My mind, despite its moments of alarming clarity, was a minefield. I couldn't trust myself to navigate the legal complexities, the bureaucratic mazes. My old friend Gus, the lumberyard owner, came to mind. He was a man of integrity, shrewd in his own way and utterly devoted to his family. But more importantly, he had connections. He would know a good lawyer, a trustworthy one. But how to reach him without Caleb intercepting? The solution came to me during one of my planned errands. An infrequent, necessary escape from Caleb's watchful eye. I told him I needed to pick up a special part for an old machine. He barely looked up from his phone, just grunted his assent, telling me to be quick. I walked to Maria's coffee shop first, my heart pounding. She greeted me with her usual gentle concern. I ordered a coffee and, with my voice barely above a whisper, asked her if she could do me a favor. A big favor. I told her I needed to call Gus, but that my phone was acting up and Caleb was managing my landline. I saw her eyes narrow slightly, a flicker of understanding passing between us. She didn't ask questions, just nodded. She handed me her personal cell phone, a gesture of trust that warmed me. I dialed Gus's number, my fingers trembling slightly. When Gus answered, his gruff voice was like a balm. I quickly explained that I needed to talk to him face to face urgently, without Caleb knowing. I told him it was about the business, about something serious. He understood immediately, his voice dropping to a low rumble. He told me he'd be in town the next day on a supply run and would meet me at the old diner on Elm Street, far from my house and Caleb's prying eyes. He told me to come alone. I thanked Maria profusely, offering to pay for the call. She just waved her hand, telling me to worry about myself. Her unspoken support was a lifeline. The meeting with Gus the next day was a tense affair. We sat in a back booth of the diner, the smell of burnt coffee and greasy fries doing little to calm my nerves. I laid it all out for him. The forged loan, the missing tools, the intercepted mail, the quitclaim deed, the insidious way Caleb was using my cognitive decline against me. Gus listened, his face hardening with each revelation, his usually jovial expression replaced by a look of grim fury. He ran his hand over his bald head, a habit he had when deeply troubled. He told me, his voice a low growl, that he never trusted Caleb, that he always thought he was too slick by half. He said he'd noticed the cheaper wood coming into the Jenkins Woodworks recently, the late payments, the abrupt termination of their long-standing partnership. He felt personally betrayed. Then he told me he knew a lawyer, a good one, a woman named Eleanor Vance. She specialized in elder abuse and financial fraud cases, and she was known for being relentless. He said she was tough but fair, and she fought for her clients like a junkyard dog. He promised to make the introduction, to tell her my story himself. He told me not to worry about the costs, saying he would handle it for now. His unwavering loyalty brought tears to my eyes. The confrontation with Caleb was carefully planned, not in the workshop, not in the house he coveted, but in a neutral territory, Dr. Reed's office. I had called Dr. Reed, explaining vaguely that I needed to discuss my cognitive health with Caleb present to ensure he understood the gravity of my condition and the importance of my medical care. Dr. Reed, bless his understanding heart, sensed the underlying tension and agreed to facilitate the meeting. He also assured me that he would keep the discussion focused on my health, giving me a safe space to plant my seeds of doubt. When I informed Caleb about the appointment, he seemed almost pleased. He probably thought it was another opportunity to solidify his narrative of my incapacity. He readily agreed to attend. The day of the meeting, the waiting room felt like an antechamber to a courtroom. Caleb sat stiffly beside me, dressed in another expensive suit, scrolling through his phone. He looked utterly bored. When Dr. Reed called us in, the atmosphere immediately shifted. Dr. Reed, usually so gentle, was all business. He sat us down, one on each side of his large oak desk. He began by explaining my diagnosis again, using medical terms that Caleb likely understood better than I did. He spoke of the progression of cognitive decline, the challenges it presented, and the need for a stable, supportive environment. Caleb nodded occasionally, interjecting with comments about his plans for my future care, about the excellent assisted living facility he had researched. He was performing, painting himself as the dutiful, concerned son. Then Dr. Reed turned to me. He asked me directly how I felt about Caleb's plans. I took a deep breath. This was my moment. I looked Caleb directly in the eye, and for the first time in a long time I saw a flicker of something beneath his polished veneer, a slight unease. I told Dr. Reed calmly, clearly, that while I appreciated Caleb's concern, I had some reservations. I said I had discovered some discrepancies regarding my financial affairs and the ownership of Jenkins Woodworks. I said I was confused about a loan, a very large loan that had been taken out against my property, a loan I had no recollection of authorizing. I also mentioned the quitclaim deed, saying I didn't recall signing anything that would transfer any portion of my ownership to Caleb. Caleb's face went white. The casual, confident mask he usually wore cracked, revealing a flash of genuine panic. He immediately interrupted, his voice sharp and defensive, telling Dr. Reed that I was confused, that I was misremembering things, that these were old man's delusions. He said he had explained all of this to me before, that I just didn't understand complex financial matters anymore. He tried to dismiss my claims as symptoms of my cognitive decline, his favorite weapon. Dr. Reed, however, held up a hand, silencing Caleb. He turned to me, his eyes steady and reassuring. He asked me if I remembered anything specific about the loan, about the signature. I said I remembered that the signature on the loan documents, the one I had seen at the bank, was not mine. I told him it was a forgery. The word hung in the air, heavy and damning. Caleb exploded. He jumped out of his chair, yelling that I was insane, that I was ruining everything. He accused me of being senile and paranoid. He said he was trying to protect me and that I was biting the hand that fed me. His voice was laced with a venom I hadn't heard before, a raw, uncontrolled fury that belied his usual calm. Dr. Reed, however, remained unfazed. He spoke with a quiet authority, telling Caleb that these were serious allegations and that he could not dismiss them as mere delusions. He informed Caleb that as Eli's physician, he had a duty to ensure his patient's well-being, both physical and financial. He then stated very clearly that, given my allegations, he would be recommending that I seek immediate legal counsel and that if necessary he would cooperate fully with any investigation. He also mentioned that he would be documenting Caleb's aggressive behavior during the meeting. The implied threat was clear. Caleb stared at Dr. Reed, his face a mask of disbelief and rage. He knew he had overplayed his hand, that his usual tactics wouldn't work on a professional like Dr. Reed. He sputtered something about unprofessionalism and defamation before storming out of the office, slamming the door behind him. I sat there breathing heavily, the adrenaline coursing through my veins. The confrontation was harrowing, draining, but it had yielded results. Dr. Reed, now alone with me, looked at me with profound sympathy. He told me he believed me. He said he had suspected something was amiss for a while, given Caleb's evasiveness and my declining health. He reiterated his offer of support and urged me to contact the lawyer Gus had recommended without delay. He told me to be careful, that Caleb would not take this lightly. The rest of the day was a blur. I returned home, the quiet house, feeling strangely more menacing than before. Caleb was nowhere to be seen. I knew this was just the beginning. The seed of doubt had been planted, the first volley fired. But the path to justice, to reclaiming my life, would be fraught with emotional landmines. The internal struggle was agonizing. I was a father and he was my son. The bond, though strained and fractured, was still there, a ghost of what it once was. How could I condemn him? How could I be the one to send him to jail to destroy his life, even if he was destroying mine? The love I once felt for that bright-eyed boy wrestled with the righteous anger, the demand for justice. It was a tormenting dance, a relentless battle between the heart and the mind. I thought of Sarah again, her practical wisdom, her unwavering moral compass. She would have insisted on honesty, on accountability. She would have mourned the loss of the son she knew, but she would not have tolerated this kind of betrayal. Her memory, once a source of comfort, now became a powerful, almost stern guide. This wasn't just about me anymore. This was about protecting her legacy, the values she had instilled in us both. The phone rang, shattering the silence. It was Gus. He told me he had spoken to Eleanor Vance. She was willing to take my case. He said she wanted to meet me immediately, that she was already concerned by what Gus had told her. He gave me her number and address, urging me to call her without delay. He also told me that Caleb had just called him, demanding to know what I had been discussing with Dr. Reed, accusing me of plotting against him. Gus said he had calmly told Caleb that he had no idea what he was talking about and hung up. The net, it seemed, was tightening. The image of Caleb, frantic and cornered, brought a perverse sense of satisfaction, quickly followed by a pang of deep sadness. This was my son, the boy I had taught to carve a perfect dovetail joint, now reduced to a desperate, petty criminal. The realization solidified my resolve. This wasn't about revenge in the crude sense. It was about restoration. Restoration of my dignity, restoration of my home, restoration of the truth. I picked up the phone, my hand steadier now. Eleanor Vance. The name felt like a beacon in the storm. The fight ahead would be ugly, public, and emotionally devastating, but I was no longer alone. I had Gus Maria, Dr. Reed, and soon a fierce advocate. And I had the truth, an unyielding, unvarnished truth that even Caleb's cunning could not dismantle. The emotional pain was still there, a constant dull ache, but it was now tempered by a growing sense of purpose. I was Eli Jenkins, a craftsman, a builder, and I would rebuild my life piece by agonizing piece, even if it meant tearing down the one person who had dared to break it. The confrontation in Dr. Reed's office had shattered the illusion, forcing me to finally choose between the ghost of a father's love and the undeniable call of justice. The choice was made. The battle was joined. The meeting with Eleanor Vance, my new lawyer, was a stark awakening. Her office, unlike Dr. Reed's comforting space, was all crisp lines and hushed efficiency, a place where emotions were distilled into facts and strategies. Eleanor herself was a formidable woman, sharp-eyed and no-nonsense, with a voice that commanded attention without ever needing to raise it. She listened to my story, every painful detail, with an intensity that made me feel utterly seen, utterly believed. I laid out all the evidence. The crumpled foreclosure. Notice the copies of the forged loan documents. The quitclaim deed. The county's property tax reassessment. Notice with the suspicious P.O. Box Gus's testimony about Caleb's shady business practices and Dr. Reed's medical assessment of my cognitive decline and Caleb's manipulative behavior. Eleanor didn't flinch. She simply nodded her pen, scratching notes on a legal pad. She told me that Caleb's actions constituted elder financial exploitation, fraud, and potentially even theft. She explained the legal process, outlining the steps we would take: filing a formal complaint, obtaining a temporary restraining order to prevent further asset depletion, and initiating a civil lawsuit to reclaim my property and seek damages. She also said she would contact Adult Protective Services, as well as the district attorney's office, given the criminal nature of the forgery. Her words were a chilling confirmation of Caleb's depravity, but also a comforting promise of justice. For the first time in months, I felt a flicker of hope, a sense that the tide might finally be turning. The emotional toll, however, was immense. The thought of dragging my own son through a public legal battle, of seeing his name tarnished by criminal charges, filled me with a profound, agonizing grief. This wasn't the boy I had raised, the child I had loved unconditionally. This was a stranger, a betrayer. The internal struggle was constant, a tug of war between the vestiges of paternal love and the undeniable call for justice. Eleanor, sensing my internal conflict, reminded me that this wasn't just about punishment. It was about protecting myself, about reclaiming my autonomy and my legacy. She told me Sarah would have wanted me to fight to stand up for what was right. Her words, spoken with quiet conviction, gave me strength. The first step was swift and decisive. Eleanor filed the temporary restraining order. A few days later, a stern-faced sheriff's deputy accompanied by Eleanor arrived at my house. Caleb was in the workshop attempting to sell another one of my antique tools, an old spokeshave I had restored years ago, to a nervous-looking collector he'd found online. The deputy served him with the order forbidding him from entering my workshop or house, from accessing my bank accounts, and from making any further financial transactions related to Jenkins Woodworks or my property. I watched hidden in the doorway as Caleb read the document, his face draining of color. He looked up, his eyes meeting mine across the dusty expanse of the workshop. For a moment, the mask of indifference slipped, revealing a raw, naked shock, quickly followed by a furious glare. He sputtered, accusing me of being crazy, of ruining his life. He yelled that I was an ungrateful old man and that he was just trying to help. The collector, sensing the volatile atmosphere, quickly made his excuses and left. Eleanor, calm and collected, explained to Caleb that his actions had left me with no choice. She cited the forged loan, the concealed quit-claim deed, the intercepted mail. Caleb tried to argue, to deny, to deflect, but Eleanor met every one of his frantic accusations with a cold, hard fact. She told him that the district attorney's office was already involved, that his actions constituted serious criminal offenses. The mention of criminal charges seemed to hit him harder than anything else. He went silent, his bravado crumbling, replaced by a dazed, almost numb expression. The deputy then escorted Caleb out of the house, instructing him to pack his belongings and leave immediately. I watched him go, a strange mixture of relief and heartbreak washing over me. He cast one last look at me, a look filled with a poisonous blend of hatred and bewilderment. He couldn't comprehend that I, his frail, forgetful father, had finally fought back. He had so thoroughly underestimated me, so utterly dismissed my capacity for agency, that the reality of his downfall seemed to shatter his very perception of the world. He was speechless, utterly broken by the sudden, brutal reality check. The house, once filled with the suffocating weight of his presence, now felt eerily quiet. I walked through the rooms, a deep sigh escaping my lips. It was over, at least for now. But the silence didn't bring peace. It brought the echoes of his words, the ghost of what we once were, the agonizing truth of what he had become. The victory felt hollow, tinged with a profound sadness. Over the next few weeks, the legal machinery moved with a relentless, dispassionate efficiency. Eleanor initiated the civil lawsuit. Adult Protective Services sent a caseworker to interview me, a kind woman who listened patiently to my story, her eyes filled with understanding. The district attorney's office began its own investigation into the forgery and fraud. Caleb, now living in a cheap motel on the outskirts of town, tried to fight back. He hired a lawyer, a smarmy, aggressive man who tried to paint me as a senile, confused old man being manipulated by outsiders. He filed motions, attempted to dismiss the restraining order, and even tried to countersue for defamation. But Eleanor was always one step ahead, armed with incontrovertible evidence and an unshakable resolve. She demolished his lawyer's arguments, presenting detailed bank records, forensic analysis of the forged signature, and corroborating statements from Gus and Dr. Reed. The most shocking moment came during a preliminary court hearing. Caleb's lawyer tried to challenge Dr. Reed's medical assessment, implying that my cognitive decline was so severe that I couldn't possibly understand the legal proceedings or make rational decisions. Dr. Reed, however, calmly and professionally presented his findings, explaining that while I did experience memory lapses, I was fully capable of understanding the nature of the fraud committed against me and expressing my wishes. He then recounted Caleb's aggressive behavior in his office, painting a clear picture of an abusive son attempting to silence his father. Then Eleanor called me to testify. Walking into that courtroom with Caleb sitting across the aisle, his face pale and drawn, was one of the hardest things I had ever done. The air was thick with tension, the stares of the few spectators like physical touches. I looked at Caleb, and for a fleeting moment, I saw the little boy who used to sit on my lap covered in sawdust, his eyes shining with adoration. The pang of grief was so sharp it almost buckled my knees. But then I remembered Sarah. I remembered the trust she had placed in me, the legacy she had helped me build. I remembered the forged signature, the stolen tools, the threat of losing my home, and I found my voice. I spoke clearly, calmly, recounting every detail of Caleb's betrayal, every lie, every manipulation. I described the meticulous craftsmanship of my workshop, the value of my antique tools, the sentimental significance of every piece of wood. I described the terror of discovering the foreclosure, noticed the agony of seeing my own name defiled. I looked at Caleb directly, my voice cracking slightly, and I told the judge that I had loved my son, that I had hoped he would carry on my legacy. But then I said he had chosen a different path, a path of greed and deceit. I explained that I wasn't seeking revenge but justice. I wanted to reclaim my life, my dignity, my home. I wanted him to understand the gravity of his actions, the profound damage he had inflicted not just on my finances, but on my heart, on the very fabric of our family. The words were a confession of my deepest pain, a raw, unvarnished truth laid bare. As I spoke, Caleb's lawyer tried to interrupt, to discredit me, but Eleanor quickly silenced him. I watched Caleb across the room. His face was a mask of utter devastation. The shock I had witnessed in the workshop was now magnified, tenfold etched across his features. His eyes, once so sharp and cunning, were vacant wide with a horrifying realization. He looked utterly diminished, a defeated man stripped bare of his arrogance and pretense. He didn't interrupt, didn't argue. He just sat there frozen, as if the weight of his own crimes articulated by his own father had finally crushed him. The callous disregard he had shown for me, for his family, was now being reflected back at him, unfiltered and brutal. The cold, hard light of truth was exposing every ugly corner of his deceit. The pride, the ambition, the very foundation of his carefully constructed persona, it all seemed to crumble before my eyes. He was a statue of despair, a monument to his own folly. The judge listened intently, her expression solemn. She granted the temporary restraining order permanence, preventing Caleb from any further access to my property or finances. She also set a date for the full civil trial, and indicated that the criminal investigation was progressing rapidly, with the district attorney's office likely to file charges soon. The wheels of justice, slow and deliberate, were finally turning. Leaving the courtroom, I felt a strange mixture of exhaustion and exhilaration. The truth had been spoken, the process begun. But the emotional cost was undeniable. The bond with my son, once stretched to breaking point, was now irrevocably severed, perhaps forever. The agony of that realization was a constant companion, a dull ache in my heart that no legal victory could assuage. Later that week, Maria visited me. She brought a homemade casserole, her smile warm and comforting. She had read about the hearing in the local paper, which had published a brief factual account of the proceedings. She told me she was proud of me, that I had done the right thing. She said she always knew something was wrong, that Caleb had been acting strangely. Her unwavering support, her genuine kindness, was a healing balm. I walked her to the door, the setting sun casting long shadows across the driveway. I told her I was tired, profoundly tired. But I also told her I felt a renewed sense of purpose. I had fought for my home, for my legacy, for my dignity, and I was not going to give up. The workshop, once a place of echoes, now felt like a battleground, scarred, but still standing. I had affirmed my truth, my values, even if it meant tearing apart the fragile remnants of my family. The pain was still there, a constant companion, but it was a pain born of integrity, a pain that affirmed my humanity. Caleb's silence in the courtroom, his profound shock, was the bitter fruit of his own actions. And I, his father, was left to pick up the pieces, not just of my life, but of a shattered paternal dream. The journey wasn't over, but the path was clearer, illuminated by the harsh, unforgiving light of justice. The days that followed the court hearing settled into a somber rhythm, a quiet aftermath to the storm. Caleb was gone, legally barred from my property, his once ubiquitous presence replaced by an echoing silence. The civil lawsuit progressed, a slow, grinding machine of paperwork and legal maneuvers. Simultaneously, the district attorney's office moved forward with its criminal investigation. I received regular updates from Eleanor, each one a factual, dispassionate account of Caleb's escalating legal woes. She informed me he had been formally charged with forgery, elder financial exploitation, and attempted fraud. He faced a substantial prison sentence. The news, rather than bringing satisfaction, brought a deep, weary ache to my soul. The workshop, my sanctuary, felt different now. The absence of my antique tools, the ones Caleb had sold, was a constant gaping wound. The generic power tools he'd left behind felt alien in my hands, their impersonal efficiency a stark contrast to the soulful craftsmanship I had always practiced. I tried to work to lose myself in the familiar scent of wood and the rhythmic hum of saws, but my heart wasn't in it. Each cut felt hollow, each joint lacked the meticulous care that had once defined my work. My memory lapses, though now understood as part of my medical condition and not just personal failure, still plagued me, making complex projects frustratingly difficult. Maria continued to be a pillar of quiet support. She'd stop by bringing coffee and homemade cookies, sitting with me in the kitchen, her presence a warm, grounding force. She never pried, never offered empty platitudes. She just listened as I occasionally recounted a memory of Sarah or a fleeting moment of Caleb's childhood innocence. She understood that grief, especially this complex, multi-layered grief, needed no grand pronouncements, just gentle companionship. She saw the true cost of my victory. Dr. Reed also checked in, regularly monitoring my physical and mental health. He adjusted my medication, offered gentle advice on managing my memory, and most importantly, reminded me that I was not alone, that my fight was a testament to my strength, not my weakness. He told me I was doing everything right, that I was honoring myself and Sarah's memory. His words, though clinical, provided a much-needed reassurance, a beacon in the emotional fog. One afternoon, a letter arrived, not from Eleanor or the court, but from Caleb's lawyer. It was a formal offer of settlement for the civil suit. It proposed to return the portion of the property Caleb had tried to seize through the quitclaim deed, to pay back the full amount of the forged loan, and to offer a substantial sum as damages for my emotional distress and financial losses. In return, I would have to drop the civil lawsuit and, most significantly, provide a statement to the district attorney requesting leniency in the criminal proceedings. The letter was cold, clinical, devoid of any genuine remorse, clearly drafted by a lawyer trying to mitigate his client's impending doom. I stared at the letter, the words blurring before my eyes. Leniency. Forgiveness. Could I do it? Could I, after everything, allow my son to escape the full consequences of his actions? The image of the forged signature flashed in my mind, followed by the memory of him selling my beloved tools, his face devoid of empathy. The pain, sharp and immediate, cut through any lingering paternal sentiment. He had not only stolen from me, but had also tried to erase me, to make me doubt my own mind. That was a wound too deep for any monetary settlement to heal. I called Eleanor. I told her I would not accept the settlement. I told her I wanted Caleb to face the full force of the law, both civil and criminal. I told her that his actions had gone far beyond mere financial wrongdoing. They were a profound betrayal of trust, a desecration of our family. Eleanor listened, her voice unwavering. She told me she understood, that she had expected nothing less. She reaffirmed her commitment to seeing justice served. The conversation with Eleanor, though difficult, brought a strange sense of clarity. The path of forgiveness, though often lauded as noble, felt disingenuous, a betrayal of my own integrity. Caleb had shown no remorse, only self-pity and a desperate attempt to escape accountability. To grant him leniency would be to validate his actions, to diminish the severity of his betrayal. This was not about hatred, but about consequences. It was about teaching a hard lesson, one he had stubbornly refused to learn his entire life. Months later, the civil trial concluded. The judge, after reviewing all the evidence, ruled decisively in my favor. Caleb was ordered to return all property rights, to repay the full loan amount with interest, and to pay a significant sum in damages far exceeding what his lawyer had offered in settlement. The judge's words were stern, emphasizing the egregious nature of elder financial exploitation and the profound breach of trust involved. She stated that while the court recognized the pain of a father having to sue his son, justice demanded accountability. The criminal trial, however, was a different kind of agony. Eleanor informed me that Caleb had at the last minute entered a plea bargain. He admitted guilt to several lesser charges of fraud and theft, avoiding the more severe forgery charges. He was sentenced to 2 years in state prison, with an additional 3 years of probation, and ordered to pay restitution to me, a sum that would be covered by the civil judgment. He wouldn't be serving time for forgery, the act that had wounded me most deeply, but at least he would serve time for his crimes. The day Caleb was sentenced, I did not attend. I couldn't. The thought of seeing him diminished and imprisoned would have been too much to bear. I remained in my workshop, staring at the raw, unfinished wood on my bench. The sounds of hammers and saws from outside, from the few loyal customers who still came to me for small repairs, felt distant, muffled by a profound sense of emptiness. The sentence, though, a form of justice, did not bring closure. It brought only the stark reality of a shattered family, a broken legacy. In the quiet months that followed, I slowly began to rebuild. Not the workshop, not in the same way, but my life. I sold off a portion of my land enough to settle the outstanding debts and to provide a comfortable buffer for my future. I carefully restored some of my remaining antique tools, finding a quiet solace in the familiar feel of wood against steel. I even started teaching a few local teenagers the basics of woodworking, passing on the skills that Caleb had so carelessly discarded. The faint scent of sawdust, once a source of bitter memories, slowly began to regain its comforting familiarity. Jenkins Woodworks never returned to its former glory. It became a smaller, quieter operation, more of a hobby than a bustling business. But it was mine again. The name Eli Jenkins was once again associated with honesty and integrity, not with fraud and betrayal. Maria, Gus, and Dr. Reed remained steadfast friends, their presence, a constant reminder of the unwavering human connection that had seen me through the darkest hours. My memory continued its slow, insidious decline, but I learned to live with it, to adapt. I kept meticulous notes, labeled everything, and relied on the kindness and patience of my friends. I accepted that I might forget names or dates or why I walked into a room, but I would never forget the lessons I had learned, the profound depths of human greed, the agonizing cost of betrayal, and the quiet, unwavering strength that lay within me. There was no happy ending in the traditional sense. Caleb was in prison, a ghost in my life, a wound that might never fully heal. The dream of him carrying on the Jenkins Woodworks legacy was shattered, replaced by the stark reality of what he had chosen to become. The relationship, once a source of immense pride and joy, was now a painful memory, a scar on my heart that served as a constant reminder of the fragility of familial bonds. But in the quiet corners of my life, amidst the hum of my remaining tools and the warmth of genuine friendship, I found a different kind of peace. It wasn't the boisterous, joyous peace of a life untouched by sorrow, but a deep, resonant calm born of acceptance. I accepted that Caleb had made his choices, that his path was his own, and that I could not and should not bear the burden of his actions. I accepted that sometimes love, even paternal love, wasn't enough to mend a broken soul. The profound truth that emerged from this crucible of pain was this: true liberation comes not from avoiding the hard truths, but from facing them head-on. It comes from demanding justice, even when it tears your heart apart. It comes from affirming your own worth, your own dignity, even when others try to strip it away. The betrayal had left me with scars, yes, but also with an unwavering clarity. I had chosen integrity over denial, justice over misplaced sentimentality. And in that choice, I found not happiness, but something far more enduring: self-respect, resilience, and the quiet, unwavering knowledge that I had fought for what was right, not just for myself, but for the legacy of honesty that Sarah and I had built. I would often sit on my porch in the evenings, watching the sun dip below the horizon, casting long, purple shadows over the land that was once again truly mine. The smell of wood smoke would drift on the breeze, a bittersweet reminder of a life lived, a legacy fought for. I had lost a son in a way that felt worse than death, but I had found myself. I had found the courage to confront the darkest corners of my family, to stand up for my truth, and to ultimately find a measure of peace amidst the profound, enduring pain. The human heart, like a piece of finely crafted wood, could bend, could break, but with care, with honesty, and with unwavering resolve, it could also be repaired, its new grain stronger, more resilient, carved by the harsh, beautiful truth. This wasn't a happy ending, but it was an honest one. And sometimes, for an old craftsman like Eli Jenkins, honesty was the most profound form of healing.